that's not real. That's not how life works. Boredom exists, scarcity exists, and now you're going to use this time to learn how to deal with it in an age-appropriate way. And what's really beautiful about that is when you fall into a rhythm as a family, you can actually start to enjoy time alone together.
Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julian.
And I'm Kirsten. And today we are sharing how we're thinking about childcare this summer, which is a big topic. But before I dive into that, I want to shout out Skippa Vibes on Spotify, who commented, "Wow, talk about on time. Excellent tips. Thank you for this." And that was about our last episode on self-promotion and selling yourself. And, as a general matter, I just want to shout out our Spotify listeners. I'm going to do a better job of incorporating the little notes that you leave into these shout outs because I see you. I see you, Jamil. I see you, Barbara. I see you, a few other people who are regularly commenting. Same with our YouTube family and our Insta cousins. I'm going to democratize the shout outs.
I like
even
that.
though we still want reviews.
Yeah,
so
we get lots of really cool shares on social media as well with the reels and the clips that we post. So thank you guys for the support. We really, really appreciate it. All right, let's dive in. Summer is here.
Summer is here. So the week that y'all are listening to this, school is out in Georgia. It probably isn't out where you guys live, but here in Georgia, school ends Wednesday. And before you think this episode is a skip, don't do it, right? There are a couple of reasons why I wanted to talk to y'all about our childcare, because whether you have children or you're child free, summer break affects everybody. It's one of those problems that I cannot believe how many employers and other people have just turned a blind eye to the fact that there is not some cohesive program that we can put our children in when school is out. And now that I've got a year under my belt, I felt like we should share our lessons and some interesting data that we found around how people are talking about childcare as a general matter.
Yeah, I think you're right. Even when I think back to the days where I was not a father, when I thought about summer, I thought about summer hours, which was a thing for a while. And I remember thinking that the traffic was a little better in the summer because kids were out and you didn't run the risk of getting stuck behind a school bus, those kinds of things. But you didn't think about it because you're just really naive, right?
I used to judge my colleagues that had kids during the summer because it meant that they had to leave early. They were always on the phone.
Yes.
I had to pick up their slack.
Yes.
And I used to be like, ugh. That's just so unfair.
Yeah, listen, if you are that person right now, you're in your 30s or 40s, whatever it is, but you don't have kids, don't be that person.
Well, it is unfair, but it's also out of our control.
Yes.
Children need care.
Understand or empathize until you're on the other side. And so we're speaking as those big cousins that are on the other side. And I'm telling you, don't be that person because they will remind you. Them 40 and 50-year-old co-workers will remind you of the time you were talking shit. And now here you are not having a plan for the summer.
So the timing is one reason I wanted to talk about this, but the real catalyst was actually this article that I read a couple of weeks ago, and I featured it in our newsletter. If you're not subscribed, do that. I featured it in Brain Candy, which is the section of our newsletter where I share interesting articles, but it was this article from The Cut, and the title was "Full-Time Job, Zero Formal Childcare." And then the subtitle was "Inside the Hectic but Cost-Effective Weekdays of the Many Working Parents Who Have Opted to Keep Winging It."
Yeah.
And that just collection of words between the cost-effective, hectic, winging it, I just had to read it. And it was basically kind of like a money diaries, but it profiled several families that have kids that aren't school-aged yet. And it just talks about how they're improvising their way through childcare.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting article for the voyeurs out there, the people who like to learn from other people's stories. But what really got me was there was this new piece of data that they introduced in the article from the U.S. Census Household Pulse Survey. And they asked parents with children that were under the age of 18 about their childcare for that week. So pulse surveys are really just asking you about your behavior during that week. Mm-hmm. And in that survey, 22% of parents said that their childcare was provided by a relative. And that was the most popular form of childcare in the country, like by a long shot.
Yeah.
It's compared to 8% of people who were using a daycare center and 5% who were using a sitter or preschool or like before, after school care. But 22% of people said that they were using a relative during that week. But here's where it gets interesting, because the data for the relative care was fairly consistent across income brackets. It's very easy to just write it off and be like, well, yeah, that's
if you can't afford a daycare, then you're going to lean on grandma or big cousin.
Correct. But what it found was that 20% of those with a household income over $200,000 were using a relative for childcare.
Yeah.
And 22% of those households that were making under $50,000 were also doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But they did find that the use of daycares and nursery schools like increased as income rose, but it still remained pretty uncommon. It was still in that 5 to 8% range. So I thought, like, when you have households who are making over $200,000, making the same choice as households who bring in under $50,000, it just kind of suggests that cost is a factor, but it's not the only factor, because in this household that makes over $200,000, presumably they can afford it depending on where they live. But like,
depending on quite a few things, right? There's some lifestyle decisions that they may have made, or, all that stuff, like personal situations. I'm choosing to start on the positive side here, which is to say, like, that to me seems like it's one of the few things we can all agree on that's like really broken about work. And I don't want to make this conversation be about how work basically underserves parents. We have beat that horse 15 times before, but that struggle, that ability to get creative in the way that we do it is, I think, something that everybody to a certain extent can relate to. And I think that's in part why we wanted to have this conversation, because I don't know that there are enough people sharing what they do so that other people can say, oh, wow. Like, what I find more often than not is that people find the first thing that works, right? Because it's such a frantic experience. And when you think about the development of a child, or in some cases, even just like their safety, like, you just kind of end up left with the scraps. Like, and we started learning kind of what felt like on the back end. We were a little lazy going into it too, but we were fortunate that we were able to tap into a couple of friends and some people who were able to say, oh no, you can do this, this, and this. And there were so many of these other things. But you started talking about cost. And I think without question, like, the fact that it is incredibly expensive, like summer camps and daycare and all of those things are so wildly expensive. And when you as a parent start looking at how much you spend on that relative to other line items that might be that same amount, it doesn't make you feel better at all.
Right.
In a lot of cases. It's kind of like, gosh, like how is it possible? This is like 3 cars. I think and there've been several studies that have shown this, like, over the last couple of years, like the cost of daycare is really, really going up, being right up there with like rent. I think the last time we checked, we spent around $60,000 in childcare before our son went to school. And that includes the fact that the first 18 months of his life, very similar to that Pulse survey, he was basically with grandma. Like, one grandma Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and another grandma on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But the other issue, the broader issue, is just like the challenge of these daycare solutions and the role that staffing plays in them, and the turnover, and how the pandemic really exacerbated and added a lot of pressure to those things, which in many cases caused some of them to close down, which further made the price of care and childcare even more expensive. On top of all of that, you've got like just regular stuff, kids getting sick, or there being all kinds of little things that, might trigger them being out of daycare, or the daycare having some type of disruptive issue. It is, it's one of those things that, you're even starting to see is bleeding into some of the political conversations around, like, what relief can the government do to step in to say, hey, you guys are doing all the right thing. You're earning more than enough money, but there's a real problem here. There's nowhere to put the kids. Like, we want to keep earning this money, but we can't do that because we don't have any solutions, any viable solutions, or at least affordable solutions for parents to be able to have their kids be taken care of while they're at work.
Yeah, and it's no fault of the daycare center owners themselves. No. The challenges just pile on top of each other. I mean,
remember, sorry to cut you off, but I remember thinking at first, because for all the new parents out there, you start thinking like, man, that's a lick right there. Well, I need to open me a daycare. Talk to a daycare owner.
Right.
Talk to one of them and see what they say about the insurance and the challenges, and watch staffing and how much of a brutal kind of business that is. So like you can look at the amount that you cut and then start adding up kids all you want, but there's a lot that goes into running those facilities.
Absolutely. And you're right. The pandemic certainly exacerbated a lot of it because what happened was you had a lot of unpredictable scheduling things going on. So the teachers would be changing jobs, or there would be an outbreak in the classroom. And so the classroom had to shut down, or your kid would come home with some virus and then pass it on to you. And so you learned, even though you pay for 5 days of care and 4 weeks a month, they're not always there full time. And so it trained us and other families to improvise. So what's happened is that a lot of parents have developed a preference for a non-formal childcare arrangement. And in fact, the data says that most parents don't have any type of formal childcare arrangement, regardless of the age of their children. So we just talked about the number of parents who are using a relative, but 61% of parents say they don't have a formal childcare plan at all. It's a mix of relatives and babysitters and working from home and whatever have you. Now, this doesn't mean that they don't pay for care, right? It's not like a free solution and they're letting their kids just kind of free range feral raise themselves. It just means that they're not under contract. They have 5 high schoolers' numbers in their phone. They have grandparents, aunties, and other chosen family like neighbors and college roommates and classmates who are just willing to help close the gaps. Exactly. And it's not easy. They're the first to admit that it is hectic and it is a headache, but it's also a la carte. And I've learned based on my own experience that that's really where the savings is. And it's also worth it. I mean, I guess we'll get to the soft part of it. Like, it's worth it. The kid benefits, you benefit. But last summer was the first summer that I experienced the sticker shock of summer camp. I had gone 8 months with no daycare, and that was wonderful. But then we got to summer, and it was my first oh shit moment because there was no plan for where he needed to be every day. So we did kind of like a mix of things. We enrolled him in 4 full-time camps, which were 1 week apiece, and those ran about $300 to $400. We did a month of swimming lessons, which was another couple $100. He spent some time with my parents, and then we took some vacations and some road trips, and then, spent quite a bit of time at the pool. But it was a lot of coordinating. There were drop-offs and pickups and send this change of clothes and pack this bag lunch. It was a lot of coordinating. And when I would talk to him about the memories from the summer, none of the camps were the highlight. None of the things I had paid for were the highlights. He really just enjoyed kicking it with us and kicking it with his friends. And so that really changed my approach going into this summer's planning.
Yeah, and I give you a lot of credit for that. And I know you spent a lot of time navigating different online forums and mom groups and local community groups, learning about what works, what's worth it, what's really cool, what kids tend to like at certain ages and those kinds of things. And so that was helpful in helping you lead the family by identifying like, hey, this is going to be a problem because there's about an 8-week stretch and there's no plan and we've got things to do. We've got a couple of things that we can do, but like them 90% of the summer is unfilled and we've got to have a plan. So here's what we did. We decided to kind of attack this almost like a little mini project. We've got 8 weeks that we need to fill. We had a couple of things in terms of vacations that we knew that we could leverage your parents for, and my mom to a certain extent, for a couple of nights and weekends and those kinds of things. But there was a lot of time that was unaccounted for. And so we decided to not just get creative, but to also jump into problem solving mode. So we started looking at our home. We started looking at his own development, his interests, some of the things that he had maybe expressed interest in, but didn't want to go all the way in. But all right, that's an afternoon that we can fill. That's a slot. Then it was like, well, what are some of the things that we really want to make sure that come the next grade, he is fully prepared for? And so we sat down and we basically made 3 things. We made a contract, which was really, really fun.
With him.
We made a contract with him. We made a calendar. So for that 8-week period, you could basically see this is what we're doing or what we're slated to do. And obviously not every single day was filled. Like that would be a bit obsessive, but you could generally see like where there were camps and where there were gaps. And then where there were gaps, it was like, well, how do we find a list of things to do? And we organized that list of things to do in 3 lists. There was things that he wanted to do, so things that he just expressed interest in. He wasn't sure if he liked them or not. There were things that he must do, which was mostly our stuff. It was like, look, by the end of the summer, you need to be able to do 1, 2,
Tie
3,
your
4, 5, 6, all
shoelaces,
these
brush
things,
your
right?
teeth on your own.
And then there was a third list, which was things that he was already familiar with, maybe things that he'd dabbled in a little bit, but he just needed to get better. And the goal here was to say, whenever there's a gap, whenever you're just bored and you're complaining and you think you're just going to eat snacks all day, you need to go to this list and you're going to sign this contract and you're going to say, you're going to start scratching off all of these different things, getting better at it. And that really helped throughout the summer because one, it created a curriculum, basically.
Yes.
It said, this is what I'm going to do. This is what we're going to do as a family. And it's not to say that it was just a long list of chores, but it was a list of skills and interests and places and just little things. And it could be like, all right, there's more to breakfast than waffles. So we're going to try French toast and we're going to try oatmeal and we're going to try different fruit. And you'd be surprised if you break it down into all those little things, you can create like a really, really long list. Like we had around 25 things on our list, but each one of them, like, if we were talking about foods or something like that, that could be broken down into who knows how many different things. And so I think that it's really worthwhile for a lot of parents or anyone that might be caring for a child is to just take this time to think about it. You think you have it all organized in your head, but like take the time to write the list, think about it, and you'd be surprised. You could fill a lot of days.
Yes.
A lot of days and certainly a lot of hours.
And it's important to involve the child because it gives them something to look forward to, which is a key for mental health. Even with adults, you need to have something to anticipate. And it helps balance the weeks a little bit. So there would be times where we'd be heavy on the must-dos. We had been focused on learning how to brush our teeth and cleaning up after ourselves. And then we had worked on the get better ats, but we hadn't had any fun. And so it was a reminder to just insert some fun. But the other thing about the list is that it also kind of makes them responsible for fixing their own boredom, which, by the way, is also important for their development. That unstructured time is where they learn what hobbies and activities actually interest them. Sometimes Bo wants to believe that life is like an iPad screen or like a YouTube homepage with infinite possibilities. And whenever he's bored with something, he can just swipe to something else. And it was important for us to teach him that, like, that's not real. That's not how life works. Boredom exists, scarcity exists, and now you're going to use this time to learn how to deal with it in an age-appropriate way. And what's really beautiful about that is that when you fall into a rhythm as a family, you can actually start to enjoy time alone together. And that is like, it's so special because I had all these plans where it's like, oh, I'm going to wake up at 5 and I'm going to work from 5 to 9 and do all my journaling and all the things that I want to do. But I realized I didn't have to do that because there would be these moments, these beautiful moments, these chunks of time in the middle of the afternoon where he might fall asleep. Like he's not a napper anymore, but summer will do it. He might fall asleep or find a movie or a Lego set, and I would be undisturbed to do what I needed to do.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about boredom, right? Because you can look at boredom a number of ways. I think a lot of people just look at it and it's just like this painful kind of blank, time period. And and like it's a natural thing. And, to a certain extent it is. But I think it's also an opportunity. And I think the opportunity here in particular is for parents to step into the role of educator and curriculum builder a little bit and to look at your children, give a nice assessment around where they are, think about where you want them to go, and then really identify what those core skills are and build in activities and habits and routines and things throughout the summer that actually lead towards accomplishing that particular goal or developing that particular skill. In our case, for example, our son has fallen in love with the game of baseball. I think to a certain extent, our whole family has over the last year or so. And the cool part about that is that, yes, he's learning particular skills. He's learning a lot about life and failure for sure. It's also like a team sport. And even when it's just me and him out in the park, right? That's one way to develop skills. But with you, he's been able to work on Legos together. The beauty of working with Legos, he can also do that by himself. And so if we ever needed like an hour for him to kind of do something and watch him lock in while also developing comprehension skills and problem solving skills, like he's got all of those different things. I think the same can be said for video games. I mean, I grew up kind of under the belief that video games were almost like a waste of time. You know what I mean? Like, I think I'm old school. I was raised old school in that sense. But now I think if you think about the role that video games can be and further like driving their sense of competition, and we've spoken about how we have used video games to help our son learn a little bit more about money. And even now you've got kids who are earning money through playing video games. And so all of these things aren't just chances or opportunities to fill boredom. They can also be platforms that can be used to develop a particular skill. And you can make that a little bit more structured if you want to. And so you've got platforms like Mathnasium or Kumon if you want them to go to these kind of business. I call them businesses, because I always think about it from an entrepreneurial standpoint, but they're programs that really zero in on like math skills or like code development and things like that. That's cool. I think one of the most overlooked opportunities for just more structured and specific academic opportunities to fill that time is to hire a tutor, but that can be a little pricey. You'd
be surprised. Like, I think the summers are for creative exploration for both the parents and for kids.
Yes.
And you don't have to go through a formal tutor program to find someone who can coach your student one-on-one.
That's where I was going.
You'd be surprised at, who in your church family has a secret hobby for woodworking, or who plays the piano and can go through a musical workbook with your child. You can get creative, but one-on-one mentorship or coaching or tutoring goes a really long way. In fact, I prefer it over the group settings of a summer camp, because that was the other thing. Like, we would put him in these academic summer camps. They weren't all academic. I'm not a total nerd, but like things where he could explore math, science, outdoors, and he would be one of 20 kids. And it's not like a classroom where they regulate the teacher to child ratio. Right. They try, but some camps just aren't able to do that. And a one-on-one tutor I could have probably gotten from a college student who is majoring in that subject, or from someone who's just willing to take a kid through a workbook over a period of time, and you can do it in different locations. And I would have gotten the same value.
I found that there are so many unpublished opportunities too, right? And I think a lot of teachers know this, but I'm saying this for all of the parents out there who are really only looking for things that are written out in a pamphlet or on a website. There are a lot of unpublished. It's almost like you're trying to sell a home, right? There's like
it's a whisper network.
There's a whisper network. There really is. And even if it is a little bit too pricey, the chances that you can find or that teacher can recommend another parent who might be interested to go halfsies with you or even split it in 3, I'm telling you, like, these opportunities exist. And so it's not just expensive summer camps or expensive private tutors. Like, you've got to be a little bit more creative, but it also requires you, I think, to just do a little bit of digging.
I think 8 to 10 weeks of unstructured time is just the perfect amount of time for a kid to go deep, because their brains are so much squishier than ours, and their ability to absorb a lot of information consistently over a shorter period of time is what leads to forms of mastery. And so it doesn't have to be the same setup as a school day. We're not talking about 8 to 5 of one-on-one tutoring. We're talking about 2 hours a day, 3 times a week, or 1 hour a day, 5 times a week. And to your point about teachers, you'd be hard pressed to find a teacher that isn't looking for some kind of side hustle. Like, some of them aren't, obviously. I know teachers want their break from students and they don't want to deal with any children other than their own during the summer.
But there are also some teachers who want to make a couple extra $1,000
or who are in a different season of life and they miss the children, or they may not want a full classroom of them, but they wouldn't mind helping out with, a certain skill or topic with your kids. So on top of pulling together a list of things that we want to accomplish, that he wants to get better at, looking through and trying to find creative resources to hire, there's also the activity and the action of like just building that list of numbers of people that you trust. Because regardless of how structured and how well thought out your plans are, you're probably going to need some care at some point, if not just for your own want to get out, like your own desire to just get out the house and be away from your children. So you have to make it a point to really create and collect that list of people. Now, our school is a little funky with handing out parent information. So if your kid has friends at school whose parents' information that you need to get so that you can keep up with them, you have to be kind of sneaky and maybe show up to the year-end event and ask them. Otherwise, you can reach out to the teacher and see if they can broker an introduction. If you don't have that crew, then Scour through Facebook and see if you have any friends or connections that have college students who are home from break, or high school students that might be looking for some extra babysitting money. You know, they don't need to commit to recurring care, but even just 1 or 2 times a week or a month can help offset the time that you need coverage. And if you don't have kids, try to be that person for somebody else, because I think that's also a huge part. Like, you don't have to commit to watching other people's kids. I get it. But at the same time, if you have a friend who has school-age children, this is a great opportunity to reach out to them and be like, hey, I'm trying to get to know your kid a little better. Are there opportunities this summer for us to hang out?
Yes.
It's just as simple as that. It does not have to be you and the kid one-on-one. It could be the 3 of y'all or the 4 of y'all. But there is something to be said about involving kids in regular activities during the summer that they don't get to participate in during the school year, because that's also a part of their development. They don't know how to act in restaurants if you don't ever take them to one. Right. They don't know how to act in public spaces that aren't necessarily created for kids if you never take them to one. So if you are child free and you have relationships with people who are balancing this, make sure that you offer up some family friendly activities, or even the opportunity to babysit every so often.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of parents get creative over the last couple of years. Mike Jordan, who's one of our dear friends, and I know they've gone to the airport and they
plane
watch planes,
yes.
which is pretty cool. So they go to, like, what do they call it? Like the
phone lot,
the cell phone lot, and they watch planes. You can do things like that. If your kid just happens to be really passionate about nature, you can buy like a kid's binoculars or something like that. It was one of the things that I realized when I was riding on the trail with our son, and I was like, oh, wow, like even when we stop for breaks to take little snacks, we could turn that into a 20, 30-minute opportunity where we're now pulling out our binoculars, and you'd be surprised. Like, you can get a closer look at the bark or the trees or in flowers or at ants or any types of animals or things like that. And so all of these things, I think, you know, there are like opportunities within opportunities.
There are.
And it might cost you like a $20 or $30 mini kids binocular, you know, that all of a sudden extends an afternoon. One of the things that we've been pretty public about, which I've actually enjoyed, was workbooks, right? Because it brought me back. It was like, oh my gosh, I remember working on these like little highlights workbooks. And so I would buy them, and we'd set a goal and say, all right, we're going to be done with this workbook in a month. And so every single day, or even if you skip a day, it's fine. But like, you just start creating that routine of chipping away. And it's really empowering and encouraging when you see the kid go from hating it to actually really enjoying it. And then even better when you can kind of step away. You start something with them, and then they take it from there for the next 10 or 15 minutes. And you just come and check their work. And then, you know, he wants to make sure that I give him his green check marks and things like that. And so there are ways, I think, to just take more advantage of time at home, or even just time within things that you are already doing. Right? Yeah. I'll give another one. We went to, what was it? The aquarium not too long ago. And I was reminded about the city pass, you know, like, which is a huge thing, right? You can get that city pass, which basically allows you to go to the aquarium, and they typically include like several other major attractions in with that thing. Before you know it, those are 3 days right there that you have filled. And if you want, you can extend that. I was like, all right, well, we went to the aquarium yesterday. Tomorrow, you're going to spend a couple hours creating a report or something like that, right? But it's little things like, you know, that you have to think like a teacher in a way and say, all right, we just did these things. They don't just take you to the aquarium. You got to come back and now present what you learned, what you remembered, those kinds of things.
But you also have to think like a parent. Like, this is also your time to get to know your child differently. Get to know your child the way that their teachers know them, the way that their friends know them throughout the day. And it really requires a mindset shift that values and appreciates flexibility and spontaneity. Because a lot of this is impromptu. I have a group chat that has all of Bo's friends' moms in it. It's actually several group chats, Bo's friends' moms. But basically, the exchange is, you know, I get off at 4. Y'all want to meet at the pool, or anybody down for a water fight at the park. It's last minute. Like, sometimes it's planned, but a lot of times it's just based off the energy of your kid. And you just got to be willing to be like, yes.
Yeah.
And then you also have to be flexible with the locations. You know, one of the moms in the group is a single mom who still has to work throughout the day. She has her kid at home, but she also has to work. And so what we'll do is she'll bring the hotspot. and she can sit in the car and work while the boys are playing in the park. She's still there, but she's in the car, still getting things done. And then occasionally we'll swap, or, sometimes we don't have to go anywhere. We can just meet at somebody's house and the kids can have ice cream outside, or we can cloud watch, which is another way to kill time. It's just lay a blanket out, look up at the sky, and call out what you see.
Yeah.
You really have to get creative and start to dig into that inner child that you have, because at the end of the day, it's both of y'all's summer break. If one member of the family is on break and it's a dependent who is dependent on your care, then we're all on break.
Yeah.
We still have to work and we still have to accomplish things, but you really have to switch out of this 9 to 5, I have nothing else to consider, if you want to accommodate like a child who's at home with you all day.
Yeah, I will give one last recommendation, and this one is a little personal. Recently, I was named the new VP of Media and Comms, I believe is my title
job
for my son's PTA for his school. And so I am now not only just the assistant coach on his baseball team, but I'm also a board member on our school PTA. And I've volunteered like several times over the last couple of years. This is really just a way for me to kind of take that to the next level. And I'm learning a lot in the process. For anyone out there that might be listening and saying, all right, a lot of these things are, require me to be creative and require me to be resourceful. I'm also willing to bet that you're probably not an active member in the PTA, because I'm telling you right now, like if your PTA is anything like our son's PTA, my hope is that we make it better. So many programs out there. And I get a very similar vibe with this situation, or I get a very similar vibe with the PTA that I did when I was in college. Story. I remember when I did this with undergrad and graduate school, and I wanted to study abroad. And my first thought after reading the pamphlet or at seeing how much it was going to cost, I was like, absolutely not. Like, there's no way I could do this. But I started digging, and some advisors kind of pointed me in the right direction. And then I learned about all of these other like scholarship programs that were like readily available and waiting for people to just walk in the door and sign up for it. Some of them required a little bit of work, like an essay and those kinds of things. But all that to say, I believe, and this is why a lot of things, even though I didn't want us to like sort of come back to work, a lot of this stuff comes back to work, because so many of us lead such busy lives that we just don't have time to think. And what you learn is that there are long-standing organizations like the PTA who are out there who are solving these problems on behalf of parents. Mm-hmm. You don't have the time. You don't have the ability to create a curriculum. You don't have the resources to plan events. You don't have to. Like, what you can do is just volunteer and be a part of the PTA and learn about all of the different things that the school, many of which are free, are available for your son. And when you do that, there's a compounding effect to it, right? Like, not only do you get to spend more time with your child, but they tend to build a stronger relationship and network. You, as a result, build a stronger network with the school. And to your point, all of the whisper networks, all of these opportunities and resources kind of present themselves and make themselves available. But the challenge is some of us are so busy and so introverted that we miss out on some of these things that are readily available. I'm going to stop here because I could talk a lot about just like your local library, but like that's also another resource for people.
It's a great resource.
It's a great resource, right?
And it's free.
Between
like everything
parks,
in it is free. Yes.
Libraries, PTAs, trust me when I tell you, not only can you fill a summer calendar that would cost you significantly less than a private tutor or a summer camp, like you're going to also develop your child at the same time. So all of that to say, we're all in this struggle together. Some of us are just a little bit more resourced than others. Some of us are probably just a little bit more creative than others. But I think we've presented enough opportunities and ways of addressing the challenge that would, I think, allow a parent to kind of fill that time, which just has a compounding effect over your quality of life. So that to me is ultimately the goal. It's going to help you. It's going to help your child. It's going to make everyone have a better summer instead of like defaulting and then having to just spend thousands of dollars to take a vacation, which is really only going to be for a couple of days. We got a lot of time to fill. And I think we've discussed and presented several of opportunities that could help fill the gaps of boredom.
Yes. So y'all let us know what y'all are doing. I want to know if that 60-something% stat is accurate. If you have kids, drop a note in the comment or shoot us a quick note on Instagram and let us know what your plans are for the summer. Are you doing the traditional summer camp or are you winging it like we are? All right, y'all. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. If you like what you heard, let us know by leaving us a 5-star rating and review, and we will see y'all next week. And if we look a little bedraggled, it's because school is out and we're trying to do the things that we're telling y'all to do. See y'all next week. If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.